Today's lecture is on Islam. Now, before I started teaching psychology of religion, I knew nothing about it, so this is my best attempt. This is called the Shahada. The Shahada is basically this statement: there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. And so one of the things that Muslims pride themselves on is being monotheistic. They actually see Christians as polytheistic, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and they see that Jesus was a prophet, but he wasn't necessarily a deity. Okay, so I don't know if you remember back to Abraham. Abraham and Sarah were really old and they were promised that they would have a child, but they didn't wait on God. So I don't want to get into that whole story, but Sarah says, hey, here, come and sleep with my handmaiden Hagar. She's a lot younger. She hasn't gone through, menopause. You can have a baby with her. And so that's where Ishmael comes from. But eventually, Sarah gets mad and says, I don't want this woman and child in my house, so get them out of here. And so, whatever, they're banished by Abraham away. And so, this is the beginning of the Muslim faith. Over here, Ishmael getting banished with his mother Hagar, and over here is Isaac. And this is the lineage that would lead to the Muslims, and this is the lineage that would lead to the Jews. It's weird how these two groups don't like each other, but they came from the same deity. Okay, so I could say the same thing for the Christians too. Because if you look at it back on this chart, you don't have to know all this for the test, but I like looking at this stuff. Here's Abraham's three, partners, and Ishmael's right here. So he was banished, but that's the Ishmaelites who become the Muslims. The people from Isaac, the legitimate son that Abraham and Sarah eventually, I should say, have when they're old, out of them, eventually through Jacob, which we talked about, come the 12 tribes of David, and out of that comes Jesus Christ. Okay, enough about all that stuff. Now, if I get back to Islam, Muhammad is known as the seal of the prophets. Yes, they see Jesus was a prophet and other people have been prophets, but he is the Mac Daddy of the prophets, the big one. And so he was born into a tribe. I don't expect you to remember this, but this is for my own education. Around 570 years after the death of Christ. And so he was an orphan, and this was important. So he had to go off and be cared for by his uncle. And while he was there, he started to work for this lady named Khadijah. And Khadijah owned a caravan business, and she was a widow. And he eventually marries Khadijah. I always remember this name because one day I looked on my roll. I was like, there's somebody in my class named Khadijah. I know what that means. Okay, enough about that. Okay, so here's actually an important fact about Muhammad. For 15 years, he would go to this exact cave on the outskirts of Mecca and meditate night after night after night. You can see how high it is up there. Now, I guess it's been desecrated and people can't go visit it, which sucks. But anyway, on the night of power, that's important, that Jibril, and I didn't know this, but for my Muslim friends, thank you, Adam, Jibril is like Gabriel. And so, just like Ibrahim is Abraham, came to Muhammad and said, proclaim him. Who is him? Him is Allah. And so for the next 23 years, he proclaims Allah. And over that period of 23 years, eventually I'll talk about it, but that's where the Quran comes from, this proclaiming. And so eventually what happens after this night of power, Muhammad makes his way northwards to the city of the Prophet, Yathrib, or I think it's Medina now. And then he unites the tribes and comes and conquers Mecca, comes back down south and dies in 632 AD. You don't have to know any of that. I just want to know it for myself. Okay, so here's one thing I never understood. If you look at the darker areas or more Muslim, it's like I understand that Muslims are here, but it's like, why is Africa all Muslim? It's like, why? It's like, I guess it's real close. And here's the answer I didn't know, because I never knew where Mecca was. If you look in Saudi Arabia, here Mecca is. And look, right across the border is Sudan. Don't get me started on the Janjaweed. That's where all that ethnic cleansing is going on, where they're going through and killing all the Christians because they want to take the country over. So, I don't know. And you can see right up here, now you have the Jewish people. So you have all this area that has a lot of strife and conflict. Always has. Okay, on this section, I wanted to talk about the Quran. The Quran was written over that 23-year period after the Night of Power. And so I have some facts over here about the Quran. He proclaims that it's the only miracle he ever did. He's not proclaiming to be a deity, Muhammad. And this was over that 23-year period. And also, he thought, and other Muslims think, the Bible is flawed because God speaks in the third person. And in the Quran, God speaks directly to people, directly to the Muslims. And so it has 114 surahs or chapters. And usually if we were in class, I would go into this. But I think if I can show this, you can look on the left. This is from an online site I go to. You can see each chapter is over here. So it's not book, chapter, verse like the Bible. It's just chapter and verse. And so if I were to pick one, I think I picked the B. I like that name. And so in this chapter of the B, you can see, oh, here's all these verses. 16:1, 16:2, 16:3. So they don't have like John 3:16. They just have 16 and 1. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. Okay, so another tradition, not only the Quran, but I thought the Quran was pure, and supposedly from all of it, everything flowed, are the Hadith. And the Hadith are this collection of sayings that people wrote down that Muhammad said, or observations on his behavior, etc., the sunnah or the practice. And so it's a lot of the traditions that guide Muslims. And so I went out, I don't know anything about this, but these are the different ones right here. So there's several books within the volume of the Hadith. Okay, so another thing that's very important in Islam is the pillars of Islam. The 5 pillars of Islam, and as far as the test goes, you got to remember this. Number 1, I already mentioned the Shahada, the monotheistic claim that there is only one God, and that God is Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. The second one, the Salat, that's the canonical prayer that we as Westerners see from the Muslims, the call to prayer 5 times a day. And I'll come back to that. The zakat, which is kind of like our tithing, which is charity. You're supposed to give part of your income to charity. Ramadan, you celebrate the holy month because what is that? This holy month recognizes and honors the night of power where Muhammad was visited by Jibril. And then 5, you're supposed to make a Hajj or a visit to Mecca and go to the Kaaba at some point in your life, and I'll get to the Kaaba in just a second. So make sure you know each one of these for the test. Now, I was going to talk about these 2 for a second. This is one of the reasons I like Islam. First of all, I love canonical prayer, that each time during the day there's a call to prayer from morning to night. Being a Catholic, there's some of that goes on for me too, but I just like that there's a very fastidious component to being a Muslim. And so there's these different salats. The only reason I know this is because I can't remember his name now. Damn it. But anyway, he took me to the mosque. My crazy country ass went over there and I saw, oh, they have these different things on the wall for Fajr and Isha. And so these different times, these different calls to prayer. That's the salat. I'm not going to ask you that on the test, but that's just for me to know. The other thing is the zakat. You're supposed to give part of your income to charity. And one of the things I focus on is this. The word currency. I should say Muhammad focuses on this. He says, you know why they call money currency? Because you're not supposed to hold on to it and stagnate with it. You're supposed to let it flow like a river. That's what we call the river flow, a current. And so instead of holding and hoarding money to yourself, that you gain money, of course, but then you let it flow back out as you bless the other people around you. Oh, is that an awesome idea? Okay, enough about that section. Okay, this is the Kaaba, this big black box right here. Now, actually, it's not a big black box. I've talked to my Muslim friends, and they say those are big black pieces of fabric that are perfumed that hang off the side of them. And so, as a part of your Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca, you're supposed to visit the Kaaba because it's kind of the center place of all Muslim faith. Okay, that's why when they pray, they face Mecca, but they're probably facing the Kaaba. And so the Kaaba, I have a few facts here, was built by Abraham and Ishmael. Now, this is what confuses me. I thought Abraham pitched Ishmael and Hagar out. It's like, get out of here. He banished them. Why would he hang out with Ishmael later on and build this big black box? And so this box was supposed to be a place of worship here on earth that reflected God's house in heaven. I really love that idea. Okay, speaking of ideas, the next idea that I wanted to get into is the jihad. Now, I know everybody immediately goes to this place with it, and I even have this picture here. Oh, that's the holy war. I know what it is. And yeah, it is a holy war in a way, but not exactly like you think, because jihad comes from the word jihada, which means to struggle. And more specifically, it is to struggle with yourself to make yourself a better person. So if you don't have a jihad going on, I don't understand what you're doing here on planet Earth. Okay, so even Muhammad says the most excellent jihad is for the conquest of self. So throughout the semester, I'm going to use this term jihad, and I'm going to use the original meaning of the term to struggle with yourself to become a better person. And so this reminds me of one of my favorite songs from Mr. Michael Jackson, and the name of the song is Man in the Mirror. I'm working on the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to make a change. Okay, I have one last section, and it has to do with the different, for lack of a better term, denominations within Islam. So after the death of Muhammad, just like after the death of Buddha or Jesus, there became these schisms or splits within their faith. And so basically within the Islam faith, it had a lot to do with who is the legitimate leader or ruler to follow Muhammad. Okay, so a caliph, I'm not going to ask you this on the test, but a caliph is regarded as both a religious or spiritual leader and also political or military leader. And so there is no separation of church and state within Muslim countries. And so there became these caliphates. And so there are these kingdoms, for lack of a better term, that were based on these successors from Muhammad. So there's a political angle there too. Now, the first four caliphs are right here. I'm not going to ask you any of this, but this is where the controversy comes in. These three supposedly aren't related directly to Muhammad, whereas the fourth one is. So some people say, nope, this is the only legitimate heir, and people that come through the line of Ali are the only legitimate ones. Those people are called Shiites. They tend to be a smaller faction. Sometimes they're more extreme, not always, but they only recognize this fourth caliph, Ali. Whereas the Sunnis say, nope, all four are okay. That's one of the biggest differences as far as this white boy can understand. Now, there's some differences about the Messiah. I don't care about this. I think it has a lot to do with who is going to get the political power and have the say-so in these countries after Muhammad died. Now, if you look at the distribution, 85% of Muslims are Sunni, whereas only about 15% are Shiite. Why doesn't it add up to 100? Because I'm fixing to talk about this really small faction called the Sufis. But even, I think, within Sunnis, you can see a lot of different denominations or divisions, and within Shiites as well. Now I'm going to come and talk about the third division, the Sufis. I save them for last because I love mystics. And not only are they mystics, but they're mystics that wander around in the desert, just like Crazy Boy right here. And so when I talk about the Sufis, I have this picture of what they call the whirling dervishes. I didn't even know that was a real thing. When I was a kid, my grandma was like, "You're acting like a whirling dervish." And I was like, what's that mean? So one of the greatest Sufi poets is named Rumi. I love Rumi. And he influenced the development of these whirling dervishes where they'll spin themselves and supposedly spin themselves into trances. So instead of taking drugs to get into altered states, they do it through this activity. Now, besides this, I talked about how they wander the desert and they're ascetic. They want to deny themselves physical pleasures, and I talk about the ascetic tradition before when I mentioned Buddha. So they feel like every time I do something for me, I build a barrier between me and God, and every time I do something not for me or that's against me, I get closer to God. And so we saw that within Hinduism when I talked about karma yoga. Okay, so the last slide I think I have here are some quotes from this famous poet Rumi. I love Rumi. Here's one of them. My soul is from elsewhere, I'm sure of that, and I intend to end up there. Oh, he's so good. He's so good. So be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Oh my God. That one kind of hurts because sometimes those guides hurt a little bit. I'm going to try not to cry, but this is the most romantic paragraph I've ever seen in my whole life, and here it is. The minute I heard my first love story, I started looking for you, not knowing how blind that was. Lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along. I hope you like that. I'll see you next time.